Hello, and welcome to reCapping with Delora
and Ashley.
Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at reCapping Podcast.
Also, rate, review, and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all the things.
We want to hear your thoughts on the movies and shows we review.
Leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or our YouTube channel, and we will read them during the show.
Or reach out to us on social media. We love talking all things entertainment and pop culture with you.
Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you. Hello, Ashley.
What's up? What's up?
I'm really excited. We are going to recap a cult classic. I remember seeing this movie way too young, apparently. Okay. And I loved it. It stuck with me and I've enjoyed it. And I'm so excited we are going to talk about it. I am talking about Death Becomes Her, 1992. It is a movie that is an hour and 43 minutes long, rated PG-13. It is a comedy / fantasy. Released July 31st, 1992, and currently available on Amazon Prime. Here's the summary. When a novelist loses her man to a movie star and former friend, she winds up in a psychiatric hospital. Years later, she returns home to confront the now married couple looking radiant. Her ex-husband's new wife wants to know her secret and discovers that she has been taking a mysterious drug that grants eternal life to the person who drinks it. The actress follows suit, but discovers that immortality has a price. That's an interesting summary. I found it off of the internet, so there you go. Cast, the iconic cast. We only need 3 names for this. We have Meryl Streep as Madeline Ashton, Bruce Willis as Ernest Mansfield, and Goldie Hawn as Helen Sharp. You know what I realized, especially if we're talking about movies from like the 80s and 90s, they had the simplest character names. You notice that? Like Helen Sharp. There was a moment throughout the movie where at the mansion where the elixir is, her servants was like Tom, Dick, and Harry. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, y'all are so unserious.
That's because they were so non-important.
Exactly. Ratings. This film for critics, according to Rotten Tomatoes, 55%. Audience score is 62%. And Google users gave this film 83%. Ashley, what is your grade for Death Becomes Her?
My grade for Death Becomes Her, coming on the heels of Beetlejuice, 2 horror supernatural cult classics back to back. I gave Beetlejuice a B, and I'm giving Death Becomes Her a B+. I think that there are things that I can pick out now as an adult that I'm like, okay. Did not age the best.
No.
Don't love this aspect, but still enjoy the nostalgia, the ride, and in this case, for sure, as I did with Beetlejuice, the cast. As much as Meryl Streep is a legend and an icon, I love Goldie Hawn even more.
Yes, I love Goldie.
Think I've seen every single Goldie Hawn feature that exists. And this one was one that she had just a different range, right? Like just a different character arc. And so it's crazy to see it now because it had been a while, like since I sat through this whole movie. And then, you know, Bruce Willis with everything he's going through definitely warms my heart to see him in his element back in the day.
Bruce Willis, though, he had a ride late 80s into 90s.
Yes.
Peak.
Yes. So for all those reasons, for me, it is a B+. What about for you?
I gave this film an A-. This movie is so camp. I just can't even. Like I love this movie so much. And again, I can't believe I watched it at the age that I did. And the fact that it stuck with me says a lot. I think having the rewatch now as an adult and for the podcast and being a woman of a certain age, this whole conversation of youth and vitality and worth. And obviously this is through the male gaze, right? Let's not let's not kid ourselves, right? It's just it's a fascinating conversation when you're talking about people with seemingly power and money, and they still want something else, right, out of this life. And we'll talk more about that um once we get past the spoiler alert. But the fact that this cast came together for this film is so quirky, is so just not something that you would think these caliber actors were doing, but they were just at different times in their careers, right? And I'm just glad that we got a chance to have this magic in moment in time for this film. All right, let's get into our spoiler alert. Now, if y'all haven't seen it yet, I don't know what to say, y'all. Go ahead and check it out. Death Becomes Her is a film about two frenemies. We have Madeline, a washed up actress, and Helen, an aspiring writer. One evening in 1978, Helen and Ernest, a renowned plastic surgeon, and Helen's Bay, meets Madeline backstage of her Broadway performance in Songbird. Helen, who's engaged to Ernest, wants him to pass the Madeline test, and he fails spectacularly. First, Ashley, do you have any frenemies?
No,
I
I do
couldn't do
not.
it. I couldn't do it. Like, what is that energy? Like, I just feel like it'd be exhausting.
Especially at this point in their lives. Like I get having frenemies to an extent when you're in school and you have to be in close
You're
proximity with
around
certain
these
people
people
that you
all the
don't
time.
want to have to be in proximity with. But at
Yep.
this point, why are you even going to her show? Like you don't ever have to see this woman again if you didn't want to. Especially back then, y'all didn't even have social media. You really
Exactly.
didn't ever
You
have to
can
see that
change
woman
your
again.
identity if you wanted to.
But it was as if like they were bonded over being obsessed with each other, honestly.
Yeah. Did Helen ever have a chance?
Clearly not with that man. Like the fact that he was ranting and raving at her show while everybody else was walking out, I'm like,
Yes.
help me understand. Like, obviously for us, it's Meryl Streep. So we like, oh, Meryl Streep
Yes.
out here doing her thing. But
Right.
clearly, as an entertainer, she's not supposed to be what she once was. And so I was just confused. But maybe he's just somebody who gravitated towards the magnanimous qualities
Yeah.
of an entertainer. And he was a plastic surgeon. So even more
Yes.
so.
That's a great point. Well, there was a lot of time jumps in this movie that also made me cackle because it's like 7 years later and then 7 years later. Like I'm like, y'all are really pushing it literally. But for the first 7 years later, we see Helen in a state. Vanity plays a huge role in this movie in terms of themes. What did you think of the quote unquote depressed Helen depiction?
She was disgusting. The eating, sitting there, I was like, you about to turn me off of my food. I am very like I hate seeing people with like food and stuff around their mouth. I have like a very uh
Gluttonous.
like uh, strong physical reaction to that. It literally makes me nauseous. So I was like, you are disgusting. You sitting up in here, probably not washing your ass, not cleaning
Well,
your
all these
house,
cats,
all
you know
these
how stinky
cats.
cats
I just
is?
cannot. And then you getting the police and your landlord beating down your door like she was gross. And I felt so sad that she allowed one man.
It was three men, though, to be fair, in total.
Sure. But At some point, you have to choose yourself over the bullshit. And
You would think
this,
after two you wouldn't bring the third one though, right?
not even just sure, but not even just that. Like, you have to figure out how to go on with your own life. Like him choosing to marry her, that's his loss, not your loss. Like, it made me sad. Is the end of the story. It made me sad.
It made me sad, and honestly, it was probably one of the first depiction of like how they went for it in terms of the imagery of it all. As you mentioned, the poor hygiene, the cats, the trash around the apartment. It was a lot. I just, I just also feel like, as I mentioned earlier, with this coming from the male gaze, it's like, why is it that a woman who's not with a man let quote unquote
Crazy
lets
cat
herself
lady.
go? Yeah, exactly.
Great stereotypical crazy
Right.
cat. That's what I'm saying. Like, you can't let this one man ruin your life, baby. Like, get on back on that horse and figure it out.
But sis was literally obsessed. Shout out to
She
Mariah
was.
Carey. Uh, she goes to the psychiatric ward and she's not even really listening to her doctors until she says completely eliminate. And that somehow gave her the spark to do something with her life. The aha moment, if you will. So we are fast forward another 7 years, and Helen is back in town, and Madeline is like, oh my gosh, she's back in town. So I gotta look my best, right? I just think it's fascinating, this whole conversation of like the actress who's married to the plastic surgeon, all the things that she does to go to sleep. Like growing up, we talk about the golden age of paparazzi and magazines in the early 2000s. And I remember reading articles about like J Lo. She sleeps on a ton of pillows and she sleeps with her face up so that her she doesn't get wrinkles. I'm curious to know if you do anything in your beauty regimen to help with aging.
No, none of those things. Even though I've heard Kelly Ripa, I feel like on an episode of Live with Kelly and whomever at the time, uh, speak about that too, about not sleeping on your face and all this stuff. I don't do any of those things, but I do have a good skincare routine. Go to the dermatologist. I'm very vigilant with sunscreen and trying to take really good care of my skin. Uh, Obviously, I'm not at the point where I feel like I'm getting wrinkles or anything like that yet. So what will get incorporated when that time, Lord willing, comes, I don't
Yeah.
know. But I also am black, and no offense, but melanin in and of itself is a beauty hack. You know what I'm saying? Like, it truly is. It
Oh
is
my
built
gosh.
in beauty protection.
I
So
actually had a conversation. Shout out to my best friend Leah. She's a esthetician, and so we exchange beauty um, products and routine tricks and all that all the time. She's my skincare friend. For me, I'm very big on being minimalistic, but my routine works. And every once in a while, I'll add in because sometimes it is a such thing to be doing too much. Like to know this generation of um, teenagers buying a bunch of skincare in Sephora, it blows my mind. I'm like, y'all don't need this expensive ass face cream at 16 years old. I'm sorry.
they also don't
But
know what all those chemicals and things do to your body long
long
term, depending on
term,
what you're buying. And yeah,
exactly. But when I was talking to my friend Leah, I was like, I feel like I like the 7 Korean steps compared to like the French skincare because one, I feel like you see better results with the Korean skincare products and they're more affordable. So I don't know. There's a great debate. So you're talking about melanin, but I'm thinking like our Asian brothers and sisters have great skin regimens as well. And I'm always fascinated on these routines, but I started incorporating gloves because my hands are, it's a soft spot for me. So I just recently bought a rolling retinol serum to put on my hands and the gloves thing. And so anyway, I bring that up too because I think it's worth noting that Goldie Hawn and Meryl Streep were in their 40s, early 40s in this film. And Bruce Willis is the youngest out of all of them. And he was around like 38, late 30s, so to speak. And so I think it's interesting how they play up, age in this particular film.
Yeah, they were supposed to be 50 at the point that they all reunite, I think.
Yes. Madeline went to her plasma bank and they were like, you can only see us 6 months at a time. And her trusted person, Mr. Chagall, he was like, call my girl Lucille Vaughn. And she was like, no, thank you. But she went to that book party and saw real quick that I need to call this up. Ashley, Madeline obviously was not good for Ernest because he doesn't even sleep in the same bed. He is getting drunk. He's now an undertaker. I really don't know if it was clear on how he went from renowned plastic surgeon to undertaker. Was that ever specified in the film?
They never said what happened, but they made it feel like somehow Madeline was to blame. And this is one of my overarching issues with the film now watching it as a grown woman is this
Mm.
whole idea of the shrew, right? And the fact that Madeline is the problem in the marriage, right? It's like Bruce Willis is just the lapdog that she beats around the house and he's just kind of has to tolerate it and put up with her, and oh, he had this fantastic career he could have had, but she's killed his dreams and his spirit and all this stuff. I didn't really care for that angle whatsoever, actually.
Yeah, but I hear you. But I also feel like Madeline's character was so toxic that she sucks up all the energy, including goodwill.
She could be toxic, but at the same time, I think there's a difference between showing a character who's toxic and having a shared experience with their partner as to why things have devolved the way they've devolved versus just feeling like, again, the onus has to be on Madeline as to why it's deteriorated the way it has. Like, if you think about it, at this point in the film, Bruce Willis supposedly doesn't have any fault. It's just kind of like, well, I married the wrong woman.
That's what it's giving. Very simplistic in that way. That's a great point. I actually do have that in my notes because I'm just like, so what is the deal when it comes to Ernest, though? Like,
Because at the end of the day, he left his fiance for
for
one of
her.
her friends.
Oh, here's the question. Is Ernest a fuckboy?
He damn sure ain't no angel. He damn sure ain't innocent.
Listen,
Maybe I am a little extra sensitive to it too, because it's not even just one. It's also Goldie Hawn's character is gonna also be this type of person. And so
yes.
that I was just like, y'all are really rubbing me the wrong way with this on this particular watch. But please keep going because we haven't even got to the, piece de resistance just yet.
Exactly. They see Helen. She's looking spectacular. She's promoting her new book, Forever Young. Helen goes straight for the juggler in terms of getting into Ernest's ear, talking about, she did this to you. What happened to you? You're not the same man that you were. She played up her relationship with Helen as well. It's like, oh, I don't blame you. I guess I didn't understand her angle with Ernest though, because obviously she wants to destroy Madeline. Do you think she's just using Ernest as a pawn?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Talking about playing both sides. Again, speaking to Madeline being essentially a vulture or a parasite. There we go. Parasite to Ernest. She out here, not only is she obsessed with keeping up with the Joneses in terms of her looks and wanting the latest procedures. She got a young side piece who he was feeling some kind of way because he was messing with a girl that was probably closer to his age. I think it was kind of low key, kind of funny how this was her rock bottom. Like, oh my goodness, my side piece left me for someone younger, and my frenemy is looking better than me, and it's pouring rain. What do I do? Let me get this card.
Champagne problems. The fact that she screamed and almost got into a car accident looking at herself in the mirror after she got wet was just the most ridiculous thing.
Oh my gosh, that tickled me so much. Well, Madeline meets the Lisol, and she introduced this magical elixir that gives youth and vitality. This scene is so important to me. This is the most memorable scene for me as a young girl. I remember seeing Lisol in this barely there costume, and obviously I didn't have the words for it, but it was her sensuality and her grace and her beauty. It just really stuck with me, and like this magical elixir. What did you think about this scene? And more importantly, how much would you pay for an elixir to allow you to maintain your youth and vitality?
This was definitely a super memorable scene. Lisa was fabulous.
I
The
mean, the
best way
black
to say it.
bob,
Yeah,
the
she was
jewels, yes.
fabulous. But she was also a bit of a ghoul, I guess, when I really think about it now,
Ooh,
because she
okay.
was feeding, like, it's one thing to like have this and have it and keep it to yourself or whatever, but she kind of fed off of other people's suffering to want to reel
And
them into this with
desperation.
her.
Yeah.
And that was a bit ghoulish to me, especially when you see at first everybody's reaction is kind of like, nah, I'm good. And then she reels you in with putting the drip on your hand and what have you, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So it was like you almost waited for her face to change. You know, it's like you're so beautiful,
Yeah.
but when's the demon gonna appear? Because
Yeah.
this is not normal what you're offering to me. How much would I pay? Not a goddamn thing, because I have no desire to go down this path. I have no interest in being around here forever. So I will go ahead and age as gracefully as
Forever, ever,
possible,
forever,
and in
ever.
the Lord's timing, deuces. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm good.
It's the warning after she drank it for me, though, where she was like, be good to your body. You and your body will be together for a long time. And I think that's actually quite significant, even outside of the context of this film. But you know what's so interesting about her saying that? And it took me actually watching it for this recap to realize that Madeline and Helen would have been fine if they hadn't, quote unquote, died.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get that initially.
Yeah.
And so, what am I talking about? Helen and Ernest were devising a plan on getting rid of Madeline so they can go off in the sunset. And we all know Helen just wants Madeline to be gone. It's the fact that Madeline comes back from her glow up and didn't even go see her husband. And they get in this ridiculous fight where he chokes her. And this is where I'm like, oh, this is where we fell. I'm like, I don't remember him actually putting hands on her like that. The fact that he did, and oh, I'm so sorry. It's like the G golly mask is officially fallen for me. You know what I mean, Ashley?
This is the reason why this film is not an A for me, because I'm not going to justify domestic abuse. He killed his wife flat
He
out.
did.
He choked her out, first of all. Then, when he could have saved her from falling down the steps, he pushed her.
Crazy.
There's no excuse for it. There's no redemption arc that happens in this film that is an excuse for it. He murdered his wife.
Truly. And like I said, that didn't stick with me. And so I was like, yo, this is crazy. The first thing this idiot does is call freaking Helen. I was like, for you to have been a plastic surgery, you don't have much common sense. Like at all. And then Madeline comes back from the dead. He goes to the hospital, and that hospital needs to be burned down to the ground as far as I'm concerned, because nothing holy is there. Like, like back in the day, I feel like almost all hospitals was associated with some type of church. It was doing too much for my liking. But that's where I had the aha moment when she started falling apart, and him being the undertaker taking care of her, doing the makeup. For whatever reason, that never connected in my brain before this recap.
I have to say, one of the funniest scenes in this movie for me was when he comes back after trying to find a doctor and she's gone. And he's like, "What did you do with my wife?" And she was like, "Oh, don't worry, sir." He was like, "What did you do with my wife?" She went down to the morgue. To the morgue? She's going to be furious. I, I was laughing out loud. That was so funny.
Oh my gosh. Well, they go home, and Helen confronts Ernest about, like, you're supposed to kill her. Again, this movie does too much. It's the quote. She's a homewrecker, a man eater, and a bad actress. And like that was the thing
That
that
order.
pissed Madeline off. I was like, y'all are so unserious. I cannot with you all. Madeline is ruthless. She was like, I want you to know one thing, Hal, you brought this on yourself. And she shoots this woman point blank in the belly, in the abdomen. Who had the best revival out of the two?
Ooh. Who had the best revival? I
Yeah,
think,
just watching the film, was there one that stood out for you more versus the other?
well, I can't remember when I watched this back in the ye old day. Because yes, I watched this as a child as well. I say this all the time. I watched so many films in the early 90s that I cannot believe I got away with watching.
Same.
So
I wasn't
this,
allowed to listen to rap music, but I watched this. I told Dave the other day, I was like, I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons, but I watched Too Young Food. Thanks for everything. Like John Leguizamo, Patrick Swayze, and Wesley Snipes dressing up as drag queens, which we don't even have the type of terminology that we have today when that came out in the early 90s. I'm like, no wonder I love drag queens. There's a pipeline there, folks. Okay, go ahead, Ashley.
yeah, again, the big one for me is In Living Color, but I digress. So I think I can't remember whether I knew already that Goldie Hawn had taken the elixir. So that was probably the more shocking one then and maybe now, just because at least we know that something odd was going to happen with Meryl because she had taken that elixir, but we didn't
Yes,
know
we did
what
not.
Goldie was doing. And so, and especially because she got shot and you see the blood, and it just definitely
Yep.
seemed like ain't no coming back from this. So that was fun. And then when she did revive and had the eyes and looking crazy, it was that was fun.
Yeah, I noticed after both of them died, their eye color was notably different.
Eyes, skin.
Yep, yep. What do you think the elixir symbolize for the characters, the ones that took it, in your opinion, between Helen and Madeline? Like, for example, for Helen, the elixir represents or symbolize her ability for revenge, whereas Madeline is vanity. Like,
For me, maybe I'm being way too literal. I think both of them is vanity. Like I think for both of them, it was a matter of being able to one up each other. Because again, I not to harp on the fact that this is about women and some of the petty things that women are stereotypically care about, but youth and beauty, especially between their rivalry, was a factor because I think Helen felt like the reason why Madeline was able to take her men is because she was pretty. So I think
mm,
that they both wanted the edge on their physical appearance that it gave them. I don't think either of them cared about immortality. I think they both just
mm.
wanted to be young and pretty.
Do you think these themes are still relevant today?
Absolutely. If anything, possibly more relevant because these days everybody has a platform. A lot of people manipulate their bodies more than they ever have to try to adhere to beauty standards.
Whew, that are
Uh,
constantly changing. Shout out to the BBLs because, like, y'all,
but also very much in our faces. I mean, there are statistics about the levels of
yes,
depression that young people have because of social media and
the
trying to
filters.
live up
Yeah,
to certain things that they're just impossible to live up to as a regular everyday person. So, yeah, I mean, I probably now more than ever, it's super relevant. And then I think we are still a very youth obsessed culture.
yeah,
So,
I agree. I want to talk more about the production again. The special effects for Death Becomes Her were groundbreaking at the time. They won an Oscar for it. How do the special effects hold up today? And how do they enhance or distract from the story?
I think everything still holds up and looks pretty good. I mean, I don't think they went overboard in the first place with everything that they had to accomplish. Obviously, having like the hole through Goldie Hawn's stomach and things like that were not necessarily the norm. But I think that in terms of the technology we have today, there's not this stark contrast that you see that's like hard to sit through like there are with some other films that you may watch from the eras that have passed us by. Because I mean, if this were an attempt at like a Marvel superhero film back in the 90s, that may be tough to sit through now. But this was just the right. First of all, it never took itself that seriously, so I think this was
Yes.
just the right
To me, I
tone.
was just about to say it was so campy that it was so on par for me, especially thinking about that scene with Madeline and her head all twisted around. And she was like, I see my ass. So ridiculous. And I think for what it did, I think it was obviously groundbreaking then. And now it's part of the humor today. So I loved it. I loved it. These ladies have it out like face off. Shout out to Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. They go at it, okay, Ashley, and they manage to figure out the ethos, if you will, of why they hate each other. I think it's interesting when you think about mortal enemies. Sometimes I do wonder, like, do you really know what this is all about? The back and forth. Shout out to House of Dragons. One of I forgot who said it, but he was like, "Who's gonna remember what started this war? Was it the kid? Trigger warning, head being chopped, or was it her baby getting eaten? What? I don't remember these people's name right now. The dude with the eye patch, Dragon, or what have you. It's like, what was this all for? What was it for? It all was because apparently Madeline was on the wrong side of the tracks. She felt excluded by Helen and her family and friends. And she was like, admit it. You thought I was cheap. And she admitted to it. And so the way Madeline got back was taking Helen's men. Are these strong enough excuses for these actions?
Apparently, for whoever wrote the script, because I was like,
Which
so it
were
comes
two
down
men, by
to
the way. Two men.
I was like, it comes down to the fact that Helen was rich and smart and Madeline was pretty. And those were
Yeah.
their weapons that they used against one another. But again, why are we friends?
Why are we friends? And as soon as they were able to have their come together moment, they realized very quickly this is where vanity comes into play. They need to get cleaned up. And who can do that? Ernest. And what had me cracking up was the fact that when they were fighting back and forth, Ernest was like, you know what? I'm good. He's like, I realize I have kept my end of the bargain till death do us part, and I am out. And the girls were like, not today. Who is going to fix me up? That is their question. Helen out here doing the plan she originally set up for Madeline on him. I'm like, you think he's that dumb? But he probably would have drank it if he wasn't giving up alcohol, though, to be fair. But they somehow managed to knock him out and take him to Lisol's house. She, as you mentioned, her being a was it a ghoul, was like, drink, live forever. And then he was like, but what happens next? And I'm like, you know what? These are valid questions. As a person who consumes a lot of vampire fiction, that has always been a conversation of like, you live forever and then what, you see all your family and friends die, right? Like you
The
get
first
bored.
the first film that I felt that viscerally with as a child was Bicentennial Man starring the Robin Williams.
Yes.
That broke my heart.
Yes.
He wanted to be able to pass away because he was so tired of having to watch everybody he cared about die. That breaks my heart to this day.
That's a great call out. Yes. And so he escapes. This whole situation was hilarious to me. Him trying to be Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, jumping on roofs
Well,
and
to be
things like
fair,
that.
he was in Die Hard, so he's done a stunt or two in his
Not
day.
far fetched. Speaking of things being far fetched, I was sitting there watching the movie like Bruce Willis has hair. Hey, this doesn't compute.
Those were the days.
He falls into the pool. I'm like, they wrapped that up nicely. And he managed to run away. Do you think Ernest had any redeeming qualities?
No. Once he killed his wife, I was done with Ernest. Like, I'm sorry for everybody who was so happy that he was able to escape these witches and go on and live a fabulous life. I was pissed. I was like, so he's gonna get away with murder? Like, we just gonna pretend
He legit
that he's cool.
left, and what they say, life begins at 50. That's what the Reverend said. And he learned that the secret to eternal life in youth is through his children and grandchildren, and he will live forever.
F him. Maybe it feels more visceral to me right now too because of the Diddies and all these folks who've done such bad deeds. But if you think about legacy, a lot of them, unless they are caught, still have a hell of a legacy that gets left. I'm not saying Ernest is Diddy. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, even though this is a horror slash comedy, I could not get past that, me personally, in terms of his character. So miss me with the funeral and the moral being that you shouldn't have drank the elixir because at the end of the day, your life and your legacy that you left on this earth should have been what it's all about. No, not with Ernest. No. Give me another person.
Yeah. So the ladies showed up to his funeral, sitting in the back, looking fried eyed and, late to the slide.
They were
They
melting.
fall apart when they fall down the stairs, and that's how they end the movie. I wanted to highlight the alternate version. So I found an old interview with Goldie Hawn, and she pretty much says that in the alternate ending that didn't test well, by the way, they said happened in Switzerland. They actually look the exact same. They were sitting in front of mountains and lakes and they were bored. And so they were asking each other, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And they're like, let's go to London. Let's go to Paris. Oh, we've been there. I guess the state of their relationship is that they still hated each other, but they were all each other had. And they found Ernest as an old man lovingly touching a woman on the verge of death, but he had a quality of life for him. And apparently Madeline looks at them and say, look at them, he's pitiful, he's old. And Helen looks over at him looks at him longingly. It's Madeline who says, aren't you glad we aren't them? And Helen lies and say yes. And I guess Goldie Hawn said that ultimately it wasn't funny, it wasn't a punchy ending, and the people were deflated. And she ended the interview saying, it's all about money, isn't it? Do you have a preference between the two endings?
I mean, I get why this one tested better because it's more visceral and you feel like they got to come up to a certain extent for the choices that they made. And one could say, because I thought it when they even talked about it, that them being all that they had was hell in and of itself, right? Because they've
Yes.
been each other's, arch rivals for as long as they've known each other. So
Yeah.
yes, in one sense, is that enough karma? Yes. But I but I think this one was more visceral and funny because even though they've bodies are broken, Goldie Hawn's like, do you remember where you parked the car? Like it's still like, I guess we got to keep it moving because what else are we gonna do?
Right.
So I get why this one was the favorite amongst viewers. But the other one would have been interesting for
I
sure.
think it would have been thought provoking for sure. I do understand why it didn't test well in terms of like it feels like a tone switch towards the end because it's like it you do have like these philosophical questions going on, but it's very slapstick, right? And now you're like, now pause and think. Like uh
Deeply.
exactly about eternity. So, upon its release, the film received mixed reviews, but has since become a cult classic. Why do you think Death Becomes Her has endured over time and gained loyal following?
I think it's one of those that probably was just not in whatever genre was maybe popular at the time to make it big at like the box office or what have you. But the cast is stacked. The story was compelling. It was funny. It was, to your point, very campy. So I think once the right crowd finds it, there's always going to be like fan appreciation. Even now, like Halle Berry is seeing a resurgence of love for her version of Catwoman, right?
Yes.
I always
Yes.
enjoyed that
I
film.
I thought it was just high gloss. Like people canned it when it came out. I thought obviously
She won a
Berry
Razzie.
looked amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was great. I just think people at the time wanted it to be more like the Michelle Pfeiffer version, right? Because that had been the
yeah.
archetype of Catwoman that
I
had held
mean,
up. And this is
she's
not Batman.
honestly Michelle Pfeiffer and Eartha Kitt kind of are neck to neck on my favorite Catwomen. But what Michelle Pfeiffer did was legendary. Okay,
I love
so
Eartha Kitt, but Michelle Pfeiffer is my Catwoman because that was my era. You know what I mean? Like Michael
yeah,
Keaton is still my favorite Batman because that was my era.
same. I love Michael
And
Keaton.
I saw a scene of, or a behind the scenes rather, video on Instagram of Michelle Pfeiffer, that scene where she is knocking the heads off the mannequins with her whip. She did
Yes.
that in one take, and that
Oh
was all
wow.
her.
I love that.
And I was like, so this is why you were legendary in this role. But Halle
Yeah.
Berry's version, I really enjoyed. Like it was just
Yeah.
it was what it was. It was not trying to
Yeah.
live up to that. So the
It
fact
was
that
doing
it's
its own thing.
now getting love and appreciation, sometimes you just have to find your audience.
It's so funny that
Everything's
you
not a
bring up,
blockbuster.
yeah. It's funny that you bring up that movie though, because that had a lot of themes about beauty and like
Sharon
what are
Stone.
you willing to do for beauty and greed, right? Any final thoughts for Death Becomes Her?
This really makes me want to go and watch a lot of Goldie Hawn projects. We already did a recap of the First Wives Club, which is one of my absolute favorites. But like
Yes.
House Sitter is one I haven't watched in a little bit. That's one of my favorites with her and Steve Martin. Like I just think I need to go on a little Goldie Hawn appreciation run because I always forget how magnetic she is on screen to me. Like I adore Kate Hudson because Goldie Hawn came before her. Like, I don't even know if
Yeah.
I would feel as much love as I do had I not been like, you have a reminiscent glow to your mother. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so funny. That's the one thing about this movie that I realized it didn't have. It didn't have like a memorable song attached to it. So like when I was watching it, I'm like, why am I keep thinking you don't own me? And I'm like, well, that's because of Goldie Hawn, you know. Yeah, this is part of, those movies that I grew up and I love. They're quirky, they're dark, they're witty. So I mean, we talked about Beetlejuice, but it's giving Adam's Family, it's giving The Witches, it's giving, it's like it was something about the late 80s and 90s and these type of original IP that we don't get a chance to see and experience as much now in movies. We get a chance to see it more with streaming, original concepts, but everybody's trying to be
Taken
prestige
from a
these
book,
days.
but yeah.
Girl, right? But everybody's also trying to be like dark and prestige. So it's not as fun, like this is fun. And it was a great time. So, all right, Ashley, if there's nothing else, time for hidden gems.
All right, I told y'all I'd probably have something this week, and I do. It's not really hidden because it's number one, I believe, for series on Netflix in the US at the moment, but it is The Perfect Couple. I was excited when I saw the announcement for this because I saw the cast and I was like, it's another Who Done It, and y'all know I love a good Who Done It. So this is actually, again, based off of a book. But if you've read the book, don't fear. The ending has been changed. So you can still watch the series and enjoy. This stars the likes of the Nicole Kidman, Liv Shriver. It's a pretty stacked cast in general from some folks from other projects, but they are the main couple as the perfect couple. And they are wealthy, elite type, and their son is engaged and somebody comes up dead the morning of the wedding.
Oh
So
my.
shenanigans ensue. We got to figure out, along with the small time cops of the town, who
Of
done
course.
it and why. Dakota Fanning is delicious in this series. Definitely one for the books, definitely one to check out. I'm going to have a hidden gem I wanted to have this week, but I haven't finished it yet on Elizabeth Taylor. That's going to come next week because I need to finish wrapping my mind around it. So this is my one for this week. What you got, Delora?
I have two this week. The first one is the new song by Halle, Because I Love You. She is out here cursing on it. Okay. She's using the standard Samuel L. Jackson's term, MFR, but it is a bop. It is very reminiscent of Busy Boy from the beloved Ungodly Hour, the album between her and her sister Chloe. And the music video is a lot of fun and she looks gorgeous. Love that. I also want to talk about a conference that I attended this week. It was called All About Women. It happened in Cincinnati and it was such a unique conference. It was about personal development and networking. And it was like all women in the Cincinnati area in very high positions. And they cover topics from health. We legit was talking about fibroids and babies and menopause, and we talked about wealth and what type of benefits we should look for in our careers. And then for lunch, the key speakers were journalists, two women, Susan Del Perico, who is a political analyst for NBC and MSNBC, and our fave, Tiffany Cross, former host of MSNBC's The Cross Connection and one of the co-hosts for Native Land Pod. Ashley, they were talking about this upcoming election because, as we were talking about in our last conversation, politics is important and it impacts our lives and impacts our family lives, etc. So it's a part of being a woman. They were talking about Kamala Harris and Trump, and they were more favorable to Kamala Harris because, similar to our conversation about the debate, she was able to deliver a cohesive message. And the way people walked out of the conversation was mind blowing. I'm like, it was actually quite frustrating for me because I'm like, if y'all can't handle a heated, in-depth conversation about politics, it's like, this matters. Like, why are y'all walking away? And I live in Ohio. It is overwhelmingly conservative, and a lot of people are probably going to vote for Trump because of their faith, quote unquote. But I love this quote from my uncle, who's a minister. He was like, people have the right to go to hell. What he said, what that means is people have the right to make their own decisions. You forcing the law on anything and, you know, claiming it is for God is one against one of the standing principle for America with, you know, separation of church and state. And then two, it's none of your damn business.
It's also utterly ridiculous to try to make it seem like Trump has any bearing,
moral standing,
yeah,
you know,
any type of foothold as a religious figure of in any way,
Ashley,
like righteousness
Ashley.
on the good foot. No, I couldn't even find the words because it's so absurd.
It's so absurd. It's like, you know, a good tree bears good fruit. It talks about that in the Bible. I'm finding a hard time finding some good fruit around that man. But anyway, I was here for the conversation. They covered everything from Gaza to inflation and then, you know, things they wanted to see about the debate. There was barely anybody there at the end, but I wasn't upset because guess what? I got a chance to talk to Tiffany. The line wasn't as long as it probably could have been. And I got a chance to meet Tiffany Cross. She was lovely. I feel like, you know, one day we could probably get her on the podcast because we would have a kiki. Like that is how she is in person, and she's really pretty, and it was great. That's all I have this week, Ashley.
All right, awesome. Well, guys, thank you for sticking with us for another recap. Please share this episode with everybody you know. We appreciate it. We'll be back, but in the meantime, as always, be blessed.
Bye.